Hello, everyone. We start the second day of our conference, Those Who Live and Those Who Stay, the Consequences of Emigration for Sending Countries. Yesterday, we had a very rich and interesting day full of panels with very different topics, from the reconfiguration of care to the positive, tangible and intangible remittances of emigrants. And today we move to a series of panels which will have to do more with the political economy of emigration and also its effects on political participation, before we finish with a panel on art. But now we start with a very big, I think, pleasure with a keynote by Professor Olga Onuch, who is senior lecturer at the University of Manchester and an associate fellow at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. I will tell you a bit more about her in a second, but just I want to first very warmly welcome her and thank her for agreeing to participate. I am myself a political scientist with a focus on protest, so I'm particularly interested in this keynote and looking very much forward to it. Dr. Onuch, as I already said, is a senior lecturer in politics at the University of Manchester, which she joined in 2014, after holding posts at the University of Toronto, the University of Oxford, and Harvard University. Her comparative study of protest, elections, migration, and identity in Eastern Europe and Latin America has made her a leading expert in Ukrainian and Argentine politics specifically, but also in interregional comparative analysis. Her book, Mapping Mass Mobilizations from 2014, explores the processes leading up to mass protest engagement in Ukraine in 2004 and Argentina in 2001. She is the author of several scholarly articles in very prestigious journals, among which Journal of Democracy, Europe-Asia Studies, Post-Soviet Affairs, Geopolitics, of many book chapters and policy briefs. And as I just understood while we were chatting before the presentation, she's also a fan of contemporary art. Without further ado, I give the floor to Professor Onuch. And if you need to share slides, I think you can do it straight away. And yeah, if you have any problems, just tell me.
Thank you so much, Julia, for the lovely presentation and for also for the shout out about the contemporary art. And just because it's the right thing to do, that book, don't worry about it. That's not the important part. The important part is Lesya Homenko's painting that makes the cover. So Lesya Homenko, who is a phenomenal contemporary artist in Kyiv, I'm sure she's doing some incredible political art or art that is not intentionally perhaps political, but ends up being extremely so when she covers the realities of everyday existence of Ukrainians. So I recommend you check out Lesya Homenko. Anyways, so I'm going to start with my presentation now. Thank you all so very much for joining today. And I'm so very sorry I wasn't able to attend the panels yesterday. Unfortunately, because of the situation in Ukraine, my schedule is a little bit more hectic than expected. But I do hope to catch up on some of these at a later date, or to connect with you, if I may, also. So I'm going to now show you my presentation. And I hope that you can see this as a full screen now. And so my presentation is going to focus mostly on one central paper coming out of the Mobilise project, which I lead with my co-PIs across 4 different countries in Europe. And then I'll end off with some more recent data about 2 cases and kind of applying what we learned in this major finding to the cases of Belarus and Ukraine as they unfolded during the pandemic, because I'm sure that might interest you a little bit. So our project really focuses on this one major question that I actually, my PhD about 11 or 12 years ago in my book really ended up on this point. When discontented, why do some people mobilize by protesting in the streets, while others mobilize by leaving the country? And there has been some research, obviously, on this topic, not least by Albert Hirschman. But I think more contemporary social science has really struggled with studying these 2 phenomena together. So really, we call it this fight or flight trade-off. in times of crisis and in times of calm, because such a calculus of fight or flight might in fact be very, well, is it a trade-off in the first place? It might in fact be very different in times of crisis and calm. Well, to be seen, right? We need the data first and the analyses. So we struggle with this idea that when states fail to respond to the needs of their citizens, individuals might have two or more, right? But in our project, we're focusing on two choices aside from doing nothing, of course. They might fight, which we call the protest, or they might choose flight, which we call migration. Now, here is very important because we do note that, especially when states fail to respond to the needs of citizens after institutional politics have failed, right? So we take that as a point of departure, that the regular electoral cycles and regular channels of engagement and channeling discontent through political systems is no longer an option or seen as not an adequate option for citizens. And therefore, we want to know what drives this intention to exit or to voice. So a few other questions might come up here. Are some people generally more dissatisfied than others in society, right? You know, I can think of one uncle in particular. It seems he's never quite happy. So is it they that are the ones who are equally likely actually to say in our focus groups and interviews and surveys and so on, that they are likely to protest and likely to migrate because of the discontent that they are experiencing? Or, and this is something more closer to our thinking, does disaffection with specific types of push factors within the home or origin country in migration scholar parlance, such as the economy or the state of democracy and its political institutions, drive the intention to protest more than it does the decision to migrate, or vice versa, right? And how does that work, right? And how can we capture that variance, if at all? So although scholars have studied these phenomena, and there are some exceptional works about transnational political engagement, voice after exit, we've heard it all before. Shockingly, between our different subdisciplines, and we spent from 2014 to 2017 doing extensive literature reviews to this effect, scholars have tended to study these phenomena separately. So sociologists, political scientists, contentious politics scholars, and migration scholars seemed to focus on these things separately, not in one study. Yet, at the same time, these different literatures identify similar drivers behind the intention to exit and the intention to voice, right? So what does the literature say in our various scholarly subfields and fields that should drive these two behaviors? Well, one major hypothesis or theoretical thinking is on the socio-demographic drivers, and for contentious politics scholars, this is called resource mobilization drivers. So things around age, things around education and socioeconomic circumstances, things around biographical availability, and how that varies the intention or the desire, as some migration scholars might call it, to protest or to migrate. So again, they say it's the same people. It's the younger people. They tend to be highly educated in a variety of studies. Socioeconomic circumstances, according to scholars of contentious politics and migration, will drive both behaviors. And, you know, women with large families are less likely than young males, so on and so forth. There seems to be patterns. Of course, these are not wholesale stories here, but there seems to be patterns that we're saying the same types of people on these factors would choose to migrate and protest in a given country. And risk factors, all these other elements here, especially from social psychology, come into play as well. Another series of hypotheses center around civil society network embeddedness. and that those who are entrenched or embedded in civil society networks that are connected to past protests, past protesters, activists, they are more likely to engage than in protests in the future and be willing to do so. And then the same hypothesis around migrants. Those who are embedded in migrant, specifically civil society networks, are more likely then to migrate themselves. A third series of hypotheses focuses on political dispositions. So partisan support is often cited, and government disapproval, disapproval of party and president are more likely to drive protest, but also scholars have told us that they are equally likely to drive migration. Okay, so the fourth set of hypotheses focus on past experience of protest and migration themselves. So if you were abroad once in your life, then you are more likely to intend to declare an intention to migrate again. Same for if you were a protester. And then that fifth set of these hypotheses in the broad literature, and I mean, we're not doing really, this is not an excellent overview here. These literatures are huge, of course, we're just really truncating them here. But the fifth set is more focused on these economic drivers and that distinction between sociotropic and egotropic. So egotropic disaffection in one's personal family circumstances or home circumstances financially, and sociotropic, the economic, the evaluation of the national economy or the country's economy, origin, home country economy. And interestingly enough, scholarship says that both of these drivers are also important for both protest and migration intention. So if you're a scholar trying to put these things together in one study, you're thinking, how is it possible that the same drivers drive both types of very different behaviors? We call them political behaviors in our project, but not everyone might agree. How is that possible? So how can they be from the same socioeconomic groups, more or less? How can they have the same experiences of the economy and politics? Is the only difference this network phenomena? Is that really the only thing? I wasn't satisfied with that. Neither were all my colleagues, part of the PIs of Mobilise project. And we started thinking about some other things here, right? We decided two things. First of all, we need to ask these questions systematically of the same folks over a period of time, right? So you need an element of longitudinal panel data, qualitative and quantitative, to really understand what is the difference between the folks who are telling us that they want to protest, the folks who are telling us that they want to migrate, maybe the folks who are telling us that they want to do both, and those in these home origin societies that tell us they want to do neither. We need to ask them both about protest and migration and all these political and economic and demographic factors over time of the same people to be able, to get around endogeneity issues. And so this is what we do in the Mobilise project. And I think this is methodologically truly innovative. We do it for qualitative and quantitative types of data. And we also formulated our own thinking, this other hypothesis that we think is incredibly important when thinking about would-be protesters and would-be migrants. So our thinking is very much that civic duty and trust, political trust, work together and might be at times mediated by networks in the case of protests, but not necessarily, is the key here for protesters. So would-be protesters have stronger preferences for democratic system. They have stronger interpersonal and our thinking is that they'll have stronger interpersonal and institutional trust, and that this is actually a different citizen we're dealing with, right? We also hypothesized that economic discontent will more so predict migration intention, especially when it is mediated by or coupled with strong network connectivity to other migrants from their hometown, from their country abroad. So we specifically think that economic disaffection, our thinking originally, by the way, was specifically that economic disaffection at the egotropic level. So personal economic disaffection would drive this based on a series of studies, Tucker et al., certainly nonetheless here. This was our thinking in the beginning. Now, I'm going to get to show you what our data has found, which I think is exciting. It opens up new avenues for scholars in the future. And I hope you agree with me that there's something really cool here. So it's a large project. We do national surveys in Ukraine, Poland, Argentina, and Morocco. These are panel surveys. So we revisit each country at 2 points in time. We also do 2 waves of migrant surveys. So these migrants, migrants from Ukraine, Poland, Argentina, and Morocco are surveyed in, let me not get this wrong, the UK, Germany, and Spain, also in a panel format over the period of the project. Then we conduct online surveys of protesters only because of the pandemic when the protests hit in these countries. We collect social media data on these varied topics as they are related. And we also conduct in-depth interviews in each of the origin and home country, as well as in each of the destination countries among migrants from the origin home countries. We conduct also focus groups in the home countries and in the destination countries amongst these populations. Over time, repeated in a panel, right? We are finishing our second wave of data collection now. You can imagine this is a huge data collection project. And there will be plenty of opportunities in the future to collaborate because there's no possibility that our team will be able to get through this data all by ourselves. So first, let me tell you about what was going on in these very vastly different contexts before March 2020 using data from our first survey wave. And because you folks here in this conference are specifically interested in those who stay behind, we will focus on the nationally representative data, or the so-called origin home countries. Parlance that I'm not fully comfortable with sometimes, and not because I disagree with it, just because it's not something that I was using up until I started Mobilise. So let me focus on 2 survey items so that you understand which items we use to capture would-be protesters and would-be migrants. These were specifically designed. We have an advisory board of many people that helped us design these questions. And these we decided were the best questions to ask in this context. So please tell me if you agree or disagree with the following statements. If the situation in your country would require it, are you ready to protest against the government? We refer to this as protest intention or protest readiness. Yeah, and the options are agree, somewhat agree, which we code in the analysis. I'm going to just show you in a second as the ones, and the somewhat disagree and completely disagree, hard to say is and refuse to answer as zeros. And there's different ways to interpret this survey item. And then we have another survey item at a different place in the survey. This is very important. These things can't come be too close together, be they in the survey or in the focus group or in the interview. We need to have some distance from them. And we had an incredibly long discussion on where these should be located in our survey. But in a special migration section of the survey, we ask, ideally, if you had the opportunity, would you like to go abroad to live or work sometime in the next 2 years, or would you prefer to stay in home country, origin country? So this is often cited by migration scholars as migration aspirations. Rather, we call it migration intention for the purposes of this project and paper. So there's different things, as I said, you can group this data in a different way. So we decided to go for all the different options in our analyses just to make sure that we are not onto something weird because we coded things differently. So we do 2 things. First, we create 4 binary variables where those who are ready to protest but not ready to migrate receive a 1, all others receive a 0. Then the second dependent variable, those who are ready to migrate only and not protest, get a 1, everyone else gets a 0. And those who are ready to do both get a 1, all others get a 0. And those who are ready to do neither get a 1 and a 0. So those are 4 binary variables. Then you can run your analyses just looking at them separately. And that's the analysis I'll present to you because it's the easiest to interpret in a slide. But because we are in fact interested in this trade-off, nexus, dynamic, and is it there, we think that it's important to also conduct multinomial logistic regressions where we use a composite variable of 4 categories. So in one variable, we have ready to protest but not migrant, ready to migrate but not protest, ready to do both, and ready to do neither. So here is a little table just showing you about the percentages. The majority of people are willing to do neither. This is important, and not the majority, sorry, the plurality of respondents, to be perfectly clear here, are not willing to protest or migrate. That's 40% across all of our cases, okay? We're not separating by case here. The next most typical response was people willing to voice but not exit. About 32% of our whole sample responded in this manner. Third is willing to both exit and voice, around 15% of our whole sample. And last is willing to exit but not voice. Yeah. So if you look at the ordering, it's do nothing, protest, protest and exit, exit. Okay. You might want to write a paper just on that because that is an interesting finding. And we know of no survey study, certainly comparative in nature, that has done that. So that's the first thing. That's already a finding in itself. And I think that's exciting to find out. We'll see what wave 2 analyses show us. And so, of course, you can use different analytical approaches here, just so that you know what I'm presenting to you is results from a logistic regression. And we employ something called full effects in our outputs. And I can go into that in a little bit more detail, but we do run robustness checks using ordinary least squares regression because a lot of people, you know who you are, do not think that logistic regressions are the way to go. So very quickly, what we find is, I thought, exciting, but also shocking, because I didn't expect this to turn, you never expect these large project ideas to turn out the way you are dreaming up in your head. On every single one of these dimensions, protesters and migrants, let's call them that, the would-be protesters, would-be migrants, are different. So let's look at here on those who only want to protest, the voice only, that top upper right-hand graph there. You can see that those individuals, eating along demographics, are different to those who want to exit only, and so on and so forth. When it comes to embeddedness in networks, they are different yet again. So those who want to protest are not, they actually negatively correlated to being embedded in migrant network ties, right? That is fascinating. They are positively correlated to being embedded in civil society network ties at home. Perhaps not surprising, but that is literally the inverse of those who choose migration only. They are positively correlated to being embedded in migration networks and negatively correlated to being embedded in civil society networks. That I find truly, truly fascinating that the data shows this so clearly. And then those who exit and voice are equally embedded in migration networks and civil society networks, and so on and so forth. And those who choose to do neither are not embedded in those networks. So here we have already a very powerful story for network embeddedness. When it comes to political dispositions, we again find that they drive these behaviors differently. And I'm just going to focus on one particular variable here, believing that democracy is the best system for one's country. It's a survey item that is used everywhere around the world. It's a well-tested survey item. Protesters are positively correlated, are more likely to hold this belief. Those who choose exit only, would be migrants, are less likely to have this belief. Those who choose, those who choose neither, are not likely also, are less likely to have this belief. And those who choose both, it's inconclusive, which is here, I think, a very particular phenomenon. There is no correlation between. So clearly, when it comes to those who are willing to fight, and that's the only option they see out of their discontent, it's democracy is best, really drives their behavior. And we see the same later when we look at past engagement, whether it's in past voting behavior or past protest participation, again, differently correlated between these two groups. When we look at economic drivers of migration and protest, here is the surprise, I think, for me, because I thought it was going to be egotropic. Remember I said that I thought would-be migrants would be more likely to have a negative evaluation of their personal economic situation. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, exit only graph, you see that it's in fact sociotropic evaluation that is driving seemingly migration more at a statistically significant level than economic, than egotropic or personal home evaluation being negative. Those who choose exit and voice are more likely to have a personal negative economic evaluation, okay? So here we need to do a little bit more thinking about the mechanisms, but again, we see a very different story. And remittances feature differently here when we talk about economic remittances specifically. But we do not see an economic story for those who are protesters only, are would-be protesters only. And I can explain how we added these variables and in what order we do a causal stages approach so that we don't contaminate our models and so on and so forth. But already here, again, a different story. So we're seeing that economic versus political distinction. We have to think about what this means more, but there is a difference. Our results show that the decision to protest and migrate are rooted in economic and democratic distinction. Yeah. And that this is really important for us to contend with as scholars. That doesn't mean that politics don't matter for migrants. They certainly do. All of us who study migrants, return migrants, people like myself who then stay abroad or whatever it may be, we know that these things matter, but they might not matter in the intention, right? In driving the intention and driving the motivation for, right? And we know that active Democrats with roots in civil society networks who are dissatisfied with the competence of the incumbent are more likely to protest relative to others in our sample across 4 different country cases. And we do country fixed effects here, so we're not, again, in our models. In contrast, those with strong ties to diaspora groups who receive remittances, probably who perceive their vote as something that is not, in fact, useful to affect change in society, and also who experience or evaluate national economies negatively, are more likely to migrate. Yeah. So how are we on time? Yeah. Okay. I want to now tell you
5 to 10 minutes more, but I think it's so interesting that, yeah.
Okay.
I would be happy to listen for 30 minutes more.
I want to hear what you all think and have a discussion. Now let me tell you, the pandemic happened. No, we did not want the pandemic to happen. I think we all in this Zoom room agree that this is not how we prefer to conduct life and experiences in society. But it did. It obviously changed the way we had to collect data. It had to, I don't want to say we were hoping for a crisis, but we certainly picked our cases because we were expecting crises to appear in at least one of them, right? We had a very strategic case selection approach. And of course, everyone's experiencing crises, unfortunately, some cases more than others. And me being Ukrainian, this is particularly difficult for me to study right now. So I'm going to do a crash case study of Belarus and Ukraine very quickly. Now, it's hard to think back to 2020. Everything you know since 2020, your mind has changed quite a bit, but try. Because when the pandemic hit, most observers made predictions about both migration and protest declining. I know it's hard to imagine today, but this is where some of the best scholars in our fields were writing blogs about. And this is what people were saying. People are going to stop thinking about stay in their countries. People are not going to, do collective action and so on and so forth. So we were the first to argue against this because luckily or unluckily, the pandemic that started to unfold in Argentina in March 2020 started to happen as we were in the field for that first wave survey. So we have a natural experiment in our first wave survey. And we know that as lockdowns have started in Argentina, there was no decrease in intention once you, of course, correct for the samples in the bias. Yeah. So we wrote blogs about that. So even before the Black Lives Matter protest waves and the several mass mobilization waves that we saw thereafter, we were arguing, wait, I think you are not understanding the motivations behind these behaviors, and it doesn't seem to work in the way you expect. So our theories do hold. Early analyses of Wave 2 data show that drivers at an exit and voice or fight behaviors remain distinct, as I just described to you. But the intention of both has skyrocketed, okay? And I'm gonna only focus that on two cases. So the summer of 2020, first summer of freedom, maybe, we saw definitely a lot of collective events around the world taking place. And so really, you might call it protesting in times of pandemic 6 months in, right? Belarus took us by surprise in so many ways, certainly was not a case in our project. Gwen Sassa and I decided, you know what, we have to survey these protesters. We have to figure out what's going on. We couldn't do it face to face on the ground, which is my preferred way to survey protesters. And we put an online survey, spoke with demographers. We recruited several Belarus experts to work with our project. And we collected a survey between August and the actual endpoint of our survey is early on in January, but January 2021, where we have over 40,000 respondents. And, once we correct for inclusion criteria and various things that we have to do in the cleaning process, we still have a survey that is, and it has a huge number of respondents. So we were able to get at what's happening amongst these individuals in a time of extreme crisis in the middle of a pandemic. And here to note, we had a strategy to recruit both non-protesters and protesters via established means to do so using social media, specifically Facebook. So if you just look at the sample together, the protesters and the non-protesters in this giant sample, and you ask them that migration intention question, a lot of them want to go abroad. 35%, or 36 if you want to round this, yeah? That's a huge number of people citing an intention to migrate or an aspiration to migrate, if that's how you prefer to call this. A plurality want to stay in the country. A whopping 17% don't know. So here we have a phenomenal context in Belarus, right? And if you are, by the way, if you are a dictator, authoritarian leader, or just let's call him Lukashenko, you might be saying, haha, the protesters want to leave anyway, right? It's that release valve thing that we always talk about. Let them go, right? Not really. Because if we look at those who are non-protesters and we look at those who are protesters, the intention, as I said, remember, these things don't necessarily, would-be migrants, or those who want to migrate, are less likely than non-protesters, less likely to be protesters. So non-protesters were more likely than protesters to want to migrate abroad. Therefore, it wasn't the people who were physically on the streets or engaged in online contention against the regime that had a higher likelihood of wanting to leave. So Lukashenko's calculus would have been wrong if the valve release thing, okay? It would have gotten rid of some of the opponents, but not all, yeah? And certainly many of those who Lukashenko regime would rely on. So that's the clip of Belarus, I think, that we need to keep in mind. Now, COVID and the continuing crisis. What you have in a country like Ukraine is you have the compounding effects of pandemic, an economic crisis that hasn't been unfolding in many, many years. And obviously increased Russian aggression since 2021. And we need to think about those compounding factors of crisis and how they affect protest readiness or migration. So I'm combining data from some other places just to give you a temporal idea. So altogether, I will be looking at data, 5 surveys before the pandemic and 5 after, okay? So I told you readiness for protest has skyrocketed. So we compare the beginning of our panel in 2019, April 2019, not only, because quite frankly, 39% of the population saying that they're ready to protest is really high already. At least that's what I thought back in 2019. It only declined slightly, yes, at a statistically significant level, but slightly when when we were right at the beginning of the pandemic and there were lockdowns and fear, only to 33% from 39. That's not what we were expecting people to say. And as our panel goes, when we revisit individuals in the panel in 2021, and then confirmed by another cross-section later on in 2021, we're at 55% of the population willing and ready to protest should the situation arise. Later in 2021, we have another cross-section where that number is even higher, okay? We're waiting for our third wave data. What does this say about, we know that Democrats are more likely to choose this option. What does this say about the quality of democracy in Ukraine? Or does it tell us something about the toll of pandemic and how it compounds the quality of democracy in Ukraine? Now, those who agree that protest is the only way to change the situation in Ukraine has now, this is the 2021 data here, has reached levels that we haven't seen since the Euromaidan revolution in 2014. So it's now at about 52%, and more recent data also confirm this. So can you imagine that we are mid-21, late 2021, we see that 52% of the Ukrainian population see protests as the only way to get the government to change its course. You might see why someone might think it's a perfect time to further destabilize a country because it looks like it's quite unstable, right? So what are the reasons here in Ukraine? Now, it requires a little bit more thinking again, but like in Argentina or in Belarus, we find that corruption is a key unifying focal point for political engagement and behavior, specifically around protest. And it is cited among migrants, but not in the same manner, the discourse and focus groups and interviews is different. Also, like we also find in Belarus, identities matter, but not in the way that some might think. So in Ukraine, we have both Ukrainian civic identity being strong as a good predictor of protest engagement, and a Democrat identity. We added more questions to try to get at that in later waves. And this is all linked to protest. But also we find that out-group identities, not feeling that one is part of the Ukrainian civic group, are also central to disaffection in Ukraine. The question we don't know yet, and may be very important should conflict escalate and further incursions occur, are these different protest constituencies, or like in the past in Ukraine, are these protest constituencies able to form cross-cleavage coalitions in the country? Okay. not all disaffection, just for your own knowledge, is connected to the president. A lot of people have cited that Zelensky's approval rating has been down and is falling down and so on and so forth. This is data obviously only until April 2021, but we have data that continues. It is down, but it's still higher than that of his predecessors. So I think that's something very important to keep in mind. It's higher than that of his predecessors at similar points in time in the presidency. So he's actually doesn't have high approval, but doesn't have as high disapproval as 3 of his predecessors. And just to give you an idea, in 6 months into his presidency, Zelensky was still at 87% viewed legitimate by the general population, and Petro Poroshenko was 81. This is a statistically significant difference, but legitimacy of these presidents then and now is not the issue. So again, we need to take that out of our increased intention to protest. Is there a COVID penalty? Is there a pandemic penalty in these countries, right? That's something we're going to investigate in each country. Well, not really. It's a little bit more complicated, and I can get into that if somebody wants to talk more. But COVID penalties seem to be much larger at the local level. In local politics, local politicians are punished more than national politicians, although national politicians are obviously getting some of the brunt, which is, again, interesting. Now let's look at migration. So on the left-hand side, you have migration intention back in 2014. As I told you, I'm going to use some historical data just so that you have an idea of where we start. A very similar question to that we use in Mobilise was used. And this is third wave. This is November, December 2014, after multiple incursions, occupations, escalations of violence, plummeting economic situation. 3.6% of the Ukrainian population had an intention to migrate abroad. When we come into 2019 in the first wave of our Mobilise survey data, that number is at nearly 19%, right? That is a 15% difference between the onset of war in 2014 and 2019, when President Zelensky is about to get elected. A year later, so a year into his presidency, that number grows to 23%, okay? Small increase, potentially pushed down by the pandemic, but nonetheless an increase. In 2 years into his presidency, in spring 2021, therefore a year into the pandemic, that number is at 38%. Of the population want to leave the country, okay? So we are at Belarus levels of intention to leave the country, right? This number has grown throughout 2021, and we're waiting for our most recent data. So what is happening? Well, when it comes to migration intention, we're really finding that experiences of poverty and economic experience specifically it's been compounded, and as it also is an outcome of the pandemic, is super important here. Yeah. And so for many, the quality of life has declined in this period. We know that. I mean, it doesn't take all a statistician to know that, but we obviously see that quite importantly. And since we know that economic drivers are most important drivers for migration, we need to think, what else do they connect with, right? And here, they do connect with outgroup identity. Those who do not see themselves as belonging to the civic group of Ukrainians, right, the civic identity, are and have experienced economic deprivation, are the ones who are more likely to want to leave and not, in fact, protest. So remember when I was saying, are these two different constituencies? The suggestion is that they are in fact two different constituencies. So I'm going to end off here. It's going to be a very sad point. When we look at data on COVID and in our surveys, it's incredibly depressing. 30% of Ukrainians in 2021 know someone who has died from COVID. That's a much higher number than what we have in places like the UK. Also suggests that data and stats on COVID deaths are under huge underestimates. I mean, I can't imagine 30% of the population knowing someone who has died from the pandemic, right? This is I think, a shocking personal tragedy for 30% of the population. But even though 49% of the population is still afraid of COVID at the end of 2021, 70% agree that despite health implications, they are most worried about economic implications. And we know economic implications drive migration and tension. So this is building a really particularly worrisome, I think, story in Ukraine. And of course, with Russian aggression and the escalation of war, will that change the migration process calculus in Ukraine? It didn't in 2014. Our data suggest it wouldn't today. And I certainly don't think it would work in the way that at least the Kremlin might be calculating. Now, it's a sad place to leave on, but it's, I think, a very stressful and sad time for Ukrainians these days, and I don't want to sugarcoat it here. It is a particularly perilous context for whether it is the Ukrainian government or other governments involved in supporting Ukraine in such a period. Okay, thank you very much.